just have a few more questions. What does touch tell us that other senses do not? What does touch tell us that other senses do not?
Well, this sends me off on a philosophical historical tear here. That Plato was Aristotle's student, and this is where, from the transmission of Aristotle to Plato, one of the fundamental schisms of consciousness and philosophy took place. Aristotle held that touch was the primary sense, that this is how single-cellular organisms navigate. They're touching their world and responding to the information they're gaining through that tactile interface, be it chemical or mechanical or whatever it is. Plato, on the other hand, and this led him to empiricism and, what is tangibly real and what can I learn about that? Plato, on the other hand, held that sight was the primary primary sense, which evolutionarily makes no sense because sight came along very late in the picture. But this led Plato off into his world of ideals, and what we're seeing is mere dross, and somewhere there is a higher seeing, not a higher touching. And I personally think Plato was one of the most dangerous philosophers in Western history. That he wicked us up into a non-corporeal spirit world which was superior. And I find that a very dangerous place to go. Led to the Republic, which is probably one of the most horrifying political tracts ever written. Get rid of the arts, and so forth. And the philosopher king. Oh my God, save us from the philosopher king. How many times do we have to try that one to understand it is not a good place to go politically? So that's where my mind tears with that one.
Bonnie, in the body, what does touch tell us that other senses don't?
Well, I think touch is the basis of all the senses.
You're
Even vision,
with Aristotle.
we're touching, huh?
You're with Aristotle. Yeah.
I don't know so much about the philosophy.
Well, the touch is being the primary sense.
If you're hearing, there's a sense of, like, what are you touching with your hearing? So I could say, oh, did you hear that bird? Well, what bird? Or no, I heard the train, or what's the sound of the silence? Or vision. How far near is your touch? I don't touch very far, I touch really close. Taste certainly is touch. Smell.
Well, this is one of the interesting things blind people tell me. They can see around corners. How so? Because they're seeing with this.
Fascinating.
One thing I wanted to ask both of you is, do you think, you kind of mentioned this with pregnancy, do you think touch is different for men and for women? In our culture, but also in the body experience?
I think it's different between people. I don't, not being a man, I don't know for sure what that would feel like. Maybe that would be for someone who's doing a transgender personal journey. Maybe they could say, when I was a woman, I felt this way when I touched, or a man, or vice versa. That I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. What have you experienced? I think that's also what...
I'm curious about it, I don't know either.
I agree with where I think you were going with that, that it's, I don't see the gender difference nearly as important as the personal difference. I mean, gender-wise, genetically, we're 2% apart. That 2% certainly counts for something. I will never experience penetration, and you will never experience thrust. I will never experience a child being born. Your energetic strong point is perhaps more yin, mine is perhaps more yang, but there's a reason why the circle is mixed. I don't really get a gender difference so much, other than acculturated differences that have been imposed on gender roles.
Yeah,
I find that much more operative than
Yeah.
anything inherent.
I guess that's my question, but it's impossible to distinguish whether there's a receptivity difference in the body or whether there's a culture.
I've run up against opaque women and open women and opaque men and open men. I don't see a gender cleavage there.
Me too, I'm just curious.
Yeah, also, when I started to create a profession for women, and then men eventually came into it. But and Feldenkrais helped a lot because he was charging big bucks, and I thought, well, if we're going to really have a profession, we have to keep up with. But that was acculturated. That wasn't necessarily. We didn't start on the same playing ground.
And Moshe was pretty much a Mitch after all.
So. Actually, I have something else because it's tickling something. The first time we had 100 students was '86. And people, a lot from Europe, there was someone from Asia, but still mainly US and European. And there were about 17 men in a group of 100. I'm not sure the exact number. In the second year, I suggested to the men that they have a men's group at lunch. We had 2-hour lunches, and I didn't take naps. Now I take naps at lunch. And I was invited to join the men's group one lunchtime. And one of the men began weeping. I don't want to say a soul story, but he was just weeping for a great loss. I mean, just totally weeping. You know what the group did? The men lifted him, and so I lifted him to the heavens to weep.
Wow.
Women would never have done that. And so I knew I'd been initiated into a cult that I would never have experienced. We would have buried him in the earth.
Exactly.
But to lift this man weeping into heaven was one of the highlights of my life. Because I felt something that I didn't have innately.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Not different than communing with that difference in the octopus. A profoundly different way of responding to that grief.
Yeah. So now I could do that. So now when this woman was crying and having difficulty speaking, I could stand up instead of going to her. I could just stand up and say, I stand with you. Because I knew that I had some of that. It's not to say women wouldn't do that and won't, but there are things that we have in our culture that are reinforced, this yin and yang business.
Well, you know, this goes back into the annals of emergence of apes and humans. You know, there seems to be some agreement between the demands of the gestation, birth, and maternal life support roles, and somebody's got to go out and get the food out of the forest. It seems, you know, something falls along those lines that have to do with physical capacity and non-negotiable roles. But then we have Amazons, and we have very yin kinds of men. But however yin I manage to be, I'll never give birth to a child, you know. And however yang you become, you'll never inseminate. And there's clearly differences, but what we do with those, I think, is so highly acculturated that it's very hard to parse out after a very primitive level of fundamental biological roles.
Yeah. One thing I found interesting in your work was the immune system aspect. There's a difference in gestation or the possibility of gestation, of needing to be able to differentiate other and self, but not in a completely differentiated way, in a still welcoming way. Of course, going through your training, I've been one of few men often. I went about a month or two ago, I was at a workshop Anna Halpern did, just a day workshop that was for men, only for men. First time she'd done that. And she said also that it was a really rich experience for her.
I realize I'm coming to the end. Do you have one more?
I had a couple more.
Or you could just throw them out, but not wait into
Sure,
space
yeah.
in between.
One I had for you, Bonnie, from your book, one thing I was curious about, you're talking a little bit more about, is how touch reaches the spirit and chi, and how we can hold chi while spirit elongates our touch into each other. Can you say a little more about that?
Don't leave space again, just read off the question, whatever you have left. Because I'm
Focus.
Sure.
like,
That's my last question for you. Then I wanted to ask you what you'd ask each other about touch, and what you'd still like to learn about touch. And the other question was, if you envisioned a workshop on the importance of touch, what might you teach in that?
I think those are three marvelous questions that would be the beginning point of another interview.
I do want to thank you very,
Yes.
very, very much. And of course to you, Deane.
Oh,
But we would not have done this without you.
what a wonderful afternoon I've had.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really thank you deeply.
Takes a catalyst, doesn't it?
It does, because I don't ask these questions out loud.
Me either.
And also to be able to dialogue and to hear. We're looking at the same thing from different viewpoints, and then
Yeah.
Part of my curiosity.